Welcome, everybody. My name is Mari Margill with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. Really happy that you're joining us today for this webinar on global developments on the rights of nature with a focus on the important work that's occurring with tribal nations. And so we just wanted to bring these two incredible speakers with you who are doing really important work. So let me just say that here at the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, obviously we're focusing on advancing democratic and environmental rights, but that includes, of course, rights of nature. And that is our focus today. Just to let everyone know, we have lots of resources available, including recordings of past webinars with people who are leading this work on rights of nature in places around the world, like in the Philippines, India, Australia, and elsewhere. So we really invite you to take a look at those. We offer all sorts of trainings and other kinds of materials to help people move this along. So if you're interested, please check out our website. We put the link in the chat box. And also just to let you know, we have some other upcoming events, other upcoming webinars that you might be interested in, well as further explore what's happening within the rights of nature movement. Next week on May 4th, which is May 5th in Australia and New Zealand, we're going to be focusing on proposed human exploration and exploitation of the moon, the lunar surface. It will include Michelle Maloney of Australia and Professor Alice Gorman and Thomas Gooch, who we worked with to draft the Declaration of the Rights of the Moon. So that's next week. You can sign up, find the registration on our website as well. On May 11th, so 2 weeks from now, we're going to bring you two folks who are leading this movement from Europe. Doris Rogetli of Switzerland, who's working on the campaign to amend the Swiss constitution with the rights of nature, as well as Pelletiel of Loden, and she's from Sweden, both of whom are working on bringing into the Convention on Biological Diversity a focus on the rights of nature as the convention undergoes a review. So we invite you to join us for those and other events. Of course, take a look at resources. We want to help bring as much education and learning to people who are interested in this so they can dig deep, figure out what they want to do, and we can help with strategy and all of that too. So don't hesitate to reach out to us as you're going further in your own exploration of this movement. So today, we want to ask you to help us welcome two really fantastic speakers and leaders in the rights of nature movement, Frank Bibeau and Guy Reiter. And we're going to start with Frank. Frank is an attorney with the White Earth Band Ojibwe and works with the 1855 Treaty Authority. Frank worked with White Earth on their rights of Menominee law. Menominee is wild rice. It's the first law to secure the legal rights of a plant species. And we'll also have with us Guy Reiter. Guy is with a member of the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin. He's the executive director of Menikanaehkem, which is a grassroots community indigenous organization that's based on the Menominee Reservation, working with the communities there on revitalization and sustainability and working with youth and other folks. He's doing really good work there. And he worked on the rights of the Menominee River Resolution, which was adopted by the Menominee tribe last year. So he's doing a lot of work to advance this movement as well. So we're going to start with Frank, just a little housekeeping, let folks know. We're going to keep everyone on mute so we can hear our speakers. There is the chat box. If you have questions you want to ask or ideas you want to put out, please don't hesitate to use that. We're going to have time for Q&A at the end of this session, so you'll be able to interact with these guys. So please don't hesitate to write your questions into the chat. We'll be monitoring that during the course of the hour. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us. We're going to start right now and ask Frank to lead us off. Frank.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me today. I think one of the most fantastic things that I've seen on the news recently was with the Klamath River and the Yurok tribe and the recognition out there. I didn't hear on the news blurb that I saw on TV the words rights of nature, but obviously that's behind all of this as well. And so it was really nice to see all that on TV. And I think that's really good information. And that was just one spot, you know. So I think that's really impressive for us. The rights of nature, what I've found as a tribal member and as a tribal attorney and things like that, when I look at the rights of nature in our culture, we would already think that all of nature has rights. And so it's not a far stretch for us to think of those things as our relatives and protecting them, and that they should have a way to be protected. And so if you look at the Mille Lacs decision in 1999 by the Supreme Court, what that decision ultimately said was that the treaties are to be interpreted the way the Indians would have understood them at the time. Well, we would have never understood some of the big dams that have been put in place and block the salmon and things like that. And we wouldn't even here in Minnesota have understood that they were going to block the Mississippi with a series of dams and create reservoirs here in northern Minnesota. And so when you start to think about what those rights might be, or what our expectations might be for people who have rights to nature as tribal members to hunt, fish, and gather, then it's a property right that you would also look to defend. And how would you look at defending it, or how would you look at maintaining that quality? And so right now we're working through pipeline, Enbridge Line 3 oil line fight. And in part, what we're mostly concerned about are water rights. And as we look at the rights of nature and we look at Menominee, Menominee is a food that is secured in our 1837 treaty. And so by having those words, wild rice, in our treaties, that is obviously a treaty protected food. And when you look at the Klamath River, that's the same with the salmon there. It may not have said it that way in their treaty expressly, like wild rice in our treaties, but it was still intended. And what the courts have now come to is that when you look at what the treaty protected food is, what the primary food source was for out there with the Yurok tribe being the salmon, for us, Menominee, but also in our treaty journals from when the treaty negotiations were going on between the chiefs and the people from the United States, we also talked about getting our livelihood from the fish and from the maple. And so when you start looking at things like maple syrup, fish, wild rice, those all require a large amount, a large volume of water, and not just water, but high quality water. And so when I look at the rights of nature, when I look at what the treaties mean now, and probably meant then, we would have never expected our areas to become polluted, to become put at risk, to have open mines, and to have things dumping into our lakes and rivers. And so rights of Menominee became a logical aspect for myself, because Menominee wild rice grows in many rivers, lakes, and waterways, in particular throughout the 1855 ceded territory, which is also coincidentally where most of the pipeline activity is right now for Line 3 with Enbridge. And so we're looking at building off of the rights of Menominee, both on White Earth Reservation and off White Earth Reservation, because we don't just pick in one place. Wild rice doesn't just grow in one place every year, and that's how it is. It sometimes is growing and sometimes it's not. You need to protect it. You need to make sure the waters are there. The water levels need to be protected, things like that. And so because we're so culturally tied to wild rice or Menominee, in our cultural history, we believe that wild rice, we were guided to where the food grows on the water, and that is the wild rice. And so it plays a very central, pivotal role in our culture and in our beliefs. And so with the rights of Menominee, we recognize that every tribal member has the right to defend Menominee in the event that it appears that government isn't taking a step forward, or maybe the 1855 Treaty Authority. It is a defense mechanism for some of the people who are being ticketed right now for trespass, for protesting and protecting waters at the pipelines. So if in fact, and what we've done also at White Earth, we've created an off-reservation tribal court, and it's nothing new. The Menominee do it, I'm sure, and other bands that have the rights to hunt, fish, and gather, the Chippewa throughout Wisconsin and Michigan. And normally it's a conservation court. But instead of having just a conservation court, we've added it into the White Earth tribal court mechanism so that you have regular judges and you have court administration and those procedures for due process and things like that. And so what we are doing from from our aspect, if you have a right to protect the natural resource you would normally harvest, whether it's fresh water, whether it's fish, whether it's wild rice, whether it's timber, whether it's blueberries, whatever those things are, and you have a right to be on those lands that are public to do it, then how can you be trespassing on a place that you have a right to be, and there are things there that you have a right to protect and or access? And so in that sense, where the state is trying to over criminalize trespass and trying to make it so that if you are actively engaged in what they call trespass of a critical infrastructure facility like a pipeline, then they want to have heightened penalties and make it a more severe crime. The interesting thing is, for the most part, trespass is really a civil regulatory crime, and we have conservation code for the 1855 reservation, and in that code we provide for trespass also, because sometimes somebody might shoot an animal and it might be able to run and jump over the fence and land in the next person's property, and you go to recover it and that person says you're trespassing. Well, then that trespass would go to tribal court because it's civil regulatory. And that's what we think is going to happen here with the trespass and or the associated crimes that they build off of trespass, which are the right to gather, the right to protest. Unauthorized protest is what they call it, or maybe being a nuisance. Those are all civil rights. And so in a sense, wild rice or Menominee may be protecting the people a second time, not just by providing food, but also providing a legal mechanism for us to protect our relative and for our relative to rely on our protection. So there's some really interesting aspects that are happening here. I don't know how much more time I have to take on that, but for right now, I'll stop and see if there's some other direction from Mari.
Frank, you do have more time. Thank you for that. I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit about how the wild rice has historically and in modern day been important for the White Earth and other Ojibwe people.
Sure. Wild rice, like I said, wild rice for us is the food that grows on the water, and where we were guided to this area here in Minnesota, also in areas of Wisconsin where that wild rice grows. And so historically, we have been the guardians of wild rice. And when wild rice first became a desirable crop and people wanted it, they would actually fly Indians and equipment into these remote ricing places and have us harvest the rice and process the rice lakeside, so that they would only fly out the finished product, because there's a lot of weight involved with wild rice and things like that. Wild rice has at times probably been one of the primary industries in Indian country for the people. It's one of the seasonal occupations that almost everybody can be involved in, whether you're a child, whether you're a teenager, whether you're an elder. You see all kinds of pairs out there harvesting in a canoe. You might see a grandma with her grandchild or great-grandchild pulling the canoe. When you go by and you see people processing rice, you see a lot of people gathering and the people coming together, kids learning how things work, working on fixing tools and so forth. At one point, it probably was 25% of our annual income for a lot of people, because they could go out and pick wild rice, sell it green, and or get it processed. And so in that sense, that was probably the thing that kept us together with our culture. As the industry has developed, they've also have paddy rice now, and it's grown commercially and things like that. And it's been substituted in many stores. And sometimes they have Indians on packaging and things like that. And so the one gift from the creator, wild rice, that was sustaining us through things economically as well as a food source, really became kind of downtrodden by a substitute product. And now I think with the rights of nature, people see that wild rice again is a way to look at something natural to protect us. Like I was saying, historically and culturally, like the wild rice is still speaking to us in a way to help each other, the wild rice and ourselves. And I think it also has that idea that everybody knows what wild rice is. Everybody knows usually that it involves a canoe, it involves some Indians, a nice autumn afternoon, the real in touch, plugged into nature. And so wild rice, I think, has become a model, much like what the Yurok tribe is doing, with the salmon. I think for me, it makes a lot of sense to use wild rice because it grows in the air, it grows in the water, it grows in the earth. It is tied to us culturally, and I think it's a natural barometer. One of the other efforts that's happened with wild rice, which is kind of interesting, it's susceptible to sulfate. And about 40 years ago, the state of Minnesota recognized that mining and other activities posed a threat with the runoff to wild rice. And so they established a wild rice sulfate standard to protect wild rice. And it stood for a long, long time, I'll say for 40 years. And then more recently, with the polymet mining, other kinds of mining, and then also with the pipelines, the state of Minnesota, the current legislature has sought to try to reduce that sulfate standard so that they can allow and permit more projects. Interestingly enough, the state of Minnesota didn't understand, much as, as tribes, we deal with the federal government a lot more. When they registered their sulfate standard, say in 1979, with the EPA, you cannot make your sulfate standard less stringent. You can only become more stringent. And so you see these legislators who are now talking about how they can essentially relax the standards to protect wild rice, even though it's the state grain, just to try to, in my mind, to get some dollars for their campaign donations, either from big oil or from mining and things like that, even though they know by now that they can't change that standard. And so wild rice, in many ways, has been a defender of the people, a protector of the people historically. And I think that's happening today. And I think we're going to find that wild rice is going to be what becomes, like I was saying, a model for other places. Wild rice is its own barometer in the environment. You can tell when it's being hurt or damaged, or if it's not growing so well. People historically know where these places are that they go annually with their family and other things. I think wild rice is going to be the lead again from the creator. The gift helps us help ourselves. So
a keystone,
go ahead.
but like a keystone species, we often hear about that as an animal, but you're talking about it as a plant species, which I think is actually really fascinating and sad. Let me just ask you one more question before we ask Guy to present, which is, can you just tell us a little bit about the process in terms of the rights of Menominee law itself that you went through to bring it into the dialogue of the tribe, but also then going through the process of having that law be introduced and adopted?
Sure. Well, initially I was working with Mari and Thomas, and we were working on rights of nature, and you guys had come out to present to us here at Leech Lake and White Earth reservations and so forth, and we were trying to figure out how to integrate rights of nature the way it was being used at the time in some of the cities and the bigger bodies of water and so forth, some of the efforts that your organization had been working on. And it took a little bit for me to figure out how to get past how would I try to gain control of the Mississippi River through the rights of nature when the Corps of Engineers has a series of probably 12 dams between here and the Twin Cities. And how am I going to try to outregulate them to protect our crop? And so it became a little bit of an odd thing. But Winona LeDuc, who I work with at Honor the Earth and also on the pipeline fight, we were talking one day about the rights of nature, and she says, well, why don't you just do the rights of Menominee, the rights of wild rice? And that's when the light bulb went on for me as far as the treaty source food. The treaties are the law of the land. That's part of the Constitution. Wild rice is mentioned in the treaties. The Mille Lacs decision came out and said, hey, can't you read that? And I think that is really the key in terms of tribal law, stepping in and doing it both on reservation and off. And when we were doing the off reservation, because we did that first, because our group, the 1855 Treaty Authority, is comprised of people from multiple reservations, and sometimes leadership comes from different places, and sometimes it's the people. And so once we enacted the rights of Menominee for the 1855, I don't think it was more than a month or so, because the same attorney, Joe Plummer, was working at White Earth at the time, and they got White Earth also into the mix, and they have an off or an on reservation rights of Menominee code. When we adopted the tribal court amendment to the code, the judicial code, so as to provide for the conservation court off reservation. I was asked by some of the tribal council members why the code for the 1855 was different than it was for on reservation. And that's an interesting piece in the sense that on reservation tribal governments have exclusive control over tribal members and resources. Off reservation in the 1855 ceded territory, for sure White Earth Reservation and Leech Lake Reservation in particular, are the largest groups of the Mississippi bands of Chippewa. And so they have the majority of those tribal members, but who's to say who's in charge off reservation when you have multiple reservations? And actually, it would be all the reservations in a sense that would have a right to send their members there or to permit their members to be there. So if you only have exclusive power on reservation, then can you try to use your power against other people off reservation, or do you need to be more permissive? And that's how we look at it with the 1855 Treaty Authority off reservation, because we recognize other people have the right to harvest off reservation. That really is more of a people's code and a right of the people who were harvesting off reservation to be most active in the defense of wild rice. And I think the tribal court is going to be the piece that's going to pull all of this together when we start putting some cases through relating to wild rice and relating to other kinds of concepts with trespass. I think we're going to really see how this can work as a dynamic and get some real life experience, because sometimes that's what you need to do, is just push the boat from the dock and start the motor and see if it's going to go someplace, and then see if you can fix it out there if something goes wrong. So.
Okay. Thank you, Frank, very much. We're going to have time for dialogue with both Frank and Guy. But now we're going to hear from Guy Reiter. And as I mentioned earlier, Guy is a member of the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin. He's the executive director of Menikanaehkem, which is a grassroots community indigenous organization on the Menominee Reservation. And he worked on the rights of the Menominee River Resolution, which was adopted by the tribe in 2020. So please join me in welcoming Guy Reiter. Guy.
Yeah, so. Hey, Wywan and Mari and Tom and Niji there, Frank. It's always good to be in communication with you guys and talking with you. And thanks for this opportunity to have this discussion. Poso, Anakwitnatakham, Wapasha Nitotam, Kashinta Nitskiwakian. My name is Guy Reiter. My real name is Anakwit, and I'm the executive director, like Mari said here, of Menikanaehkem, which is a grassroots organization on the Menominee Indian Reservation. We have an 80-acre farm that we operate. We're building tiny homes. We're trying to, we have an energy sovereignty initiative. We're working in MMIW work, environmental justice, language, cultural revitalization, all kinds of things, you know, that we're involved in. We do definitely have a youth group, and those guys are pretty active. I mean, we've been, just like everybody else, locked down here because of COVID, so we haven't been able to do too much. Whole lot of looking at the screen and doing what I'm doing right now for the past year. You know, I was basically raised on and off the reservation my whole life here. Grew up in the surrounding area and went to school on and off reservation. You know, was always involved, or at least always around movements. You know, when I was young, I remember being around the hunting and fishing rights, the Ojibwe hunting and fishing rights when I was young here in Wisconsin. You know, I remember growing up listening to my grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles talk about the restoration efforts that happened here in our community. Our Menominee tribe was terminated, was the very first tribe to be terminated in that termination era. And you know, I had a lot of family members that were involved in that, getting us restored as a federally recognized tribe. And I'm really honored to you know, have relatives like that that we're gonna jump in and do something about the current condition. But I also, remember growing up and being around the Exxon mine in Crandon that they were proposing. So it's kind of just always been around movements like that, and not that I was like deeply involved as a kid, but just being sometimes dragged to different events and if you want to call them protests or whatnot, but being in those things. So I kind of to this day, really continue that work and have very much been involved in lots of environmental things, and rights of nature is something it's new, but it's old. Been around for a long time. For us as Menominee people, our oral history states that we come from the Menominee Indian Reservation. And excuse me, from the Menominee River. Well, we do come from a reservation too, but originally we came from the Menominee River, and the Menominee River is the natural border between Upper Michigan and Wisconsin. And we've lived there for time immemorial. And I could tell you that creation story, but it would take about 2 days to get through it all. And I know we don't have that kind of time. But there was a mine that was proposed there. Boy, it's probably going on like 20 years now, or close to that. The whole thing. I haven't been involved the whole 20 years, but there was speculation for a lot of years and just some exploratory drilling and things. But there's a company by the name of Aquila Resources who it came into the area on the Menominee River and found some material and minerals that they liked, so they proposed to extract that minerals out of the earth, gold and zinc and things like that. And the project they created was the Back 40 project. They wanted to make it seem as if it's just the old mom and pop thing and no big deal, but it's not. It's a huge project. We've been involved. I've been involved for, I would say, probably nine years. Just going against this project and the company. But we've done lots of things to try to be roadblocks, to try to just put a thorn in their side, really, to slow this thing down, to hopefully eventually stop it. Rights of nature came for me, the aha moment, kind of like, Meniji here, he said about his aha moment was, working and trying to find strategies of how we can stop this mine. And I come across rights of nature, and I was like, man, oh man, that's beautiful. It's really something that we should look into and try to think about how we could do it. So I was fortunate enough to do a conference, I don't know, quite a while back now with Mari, and I heard her rights of nature speech, which was fantastic, and it was like something that always stuck in my head, and I just didn't know how how it could play into the role at the time. But when I got we got so far down along this fight with the Back 40, it came full right out in front that this is something that we should try. So with Mari's help and Thomas's help, we were able to draft a resolution, recognizing the Menominee River having rights. And a lot of that resolution was based on our own culture and our own understanding already of our clan system and other things. And it was pretty incredible. And I'm proud to say that January 2020, our tribe passed that resolution unanimously, and it was an amazing feat. We educated our legislative members as much as we could to let them know kind of what we're thinking about, but really, wanted them to realize that this resolution is based on who we are as Menominee people than it is anything else. So, that resolution was really, something that was like a step 1 to a step 2 to 3, 4, 5, however you want to think about it. But along this journey, I really start to realize how rights of nature are already within all of our policies here, on the Menominee Indian Reservation, and it's within our codes. It's within our laws. It's within our everyday life here on the reservation. Everything we do is recognizing rights of nature and trying to live sustainably within it. So it was a pretty easy sell once people started to understand that, like, here in our community we're already doing these things. We just don't call it that, or we just never really like took that part out of it and looked at it and examined it. But some of the things that we already do here on the reservation, on the Menominee Indian Reservation here, is sustained yield. It's something that goes back to our culture, that goes back many, many years of taking only the older and dying trees and cutting in a circle. So being very selective of the trees in which we're cutting. And anybody has ever been to our reservation here, we are heavily forested. We're probably 90% forest. And a lot of people say is our reservation looks like what Wisconsin looked like prior to European invasion. And it's quite incredible place here, and I'm really honored to be able to live here and also be in this natural world, this natural landscape and environment. One of the other things that we've also done here on the reservation is along our beautiful Wolf River, which flows through the heart of our reservation, was a part of that Crandon mine a while back. But we took a quarter mile on each side of that river, and we don't allow any building or any construction or anything, to protect the wildness of that river and that ecosystem. And it's things like that, I think, that are so amazing. When I think of rights of nature, and I think of things that tribes are already doing, it's already been there. We were definitely thinking about after we got this resolution, what we wanted to do, and we wanted to establish a constitutional amendment. We really wanted to have our whatever we put down about our rights of nature have a little bit of teeth and have some ability to use it. So we're in the process of drafting that amendment, kicking around things, and still putting it together. We haven't introduced it yet, or I haven't introduced it yet. We're still waiting for some things to kind of talk through some stuff with it. But I'm excited about it. I think that hopefully our tribe can understand that, like, they're already doing these things and it's a no-brainer. The other thing too is that we also think about the 7 generations too, the rights of the 7 generations, and thinking about our descendants that are to come here at some point, and we want to make sure that they too have the ability to live in this beautiful creation and experience it to its fullness, like a lot of us have, if not all of us here on this call have been able to. So we're thinking of things like that, and it really makes me think of like the tribes are the best vehicle for this type of work. When I think about it, I know a lot of rights of nature work. There is not a lot of case law in America. Case law is basically everything, and if you don't have any of it to go off of our things, it's a little bit harder to do things here and there. But this movement is relatively new, and there's a lot of folks, a lot of tribes picking this up and doing things. So our tribes, have these unique mechanisms. They have their own governments, and we have, like Manija here, he said, our treaties and things that we can use to help us to create case law. And the biggest thing I think that the reason why tribes should be leading these efforts is we've always taken care of the land. You'll never hear of a tribe, decimating, forests or you know, killing off species or things. We've always taken care of our environment. We've always taken care of our relatives. It's a part of who we are. And, every time I hear one of my brothers or sisters talk about their tribe or their culture, it always revolves around them taking care of the land. And you know um, our tribes have that track record, and I think that that's why one of the main reasons that they should be leading this fight. And I know people always ask me, well, how do I get involved, or how can I be a good ally? And I think, if you recognize that our tribe should be, um, the ones leading this thing, you got to also recognize that, we're our tribe sometimes deal with so many different things all the time, and that there's so many things that are coming at the tribe on a daily basis that a lot of times, we don't have the people to answer all the calls, or we're doing 6 7 different things at a time. And I don't necessarily work for the tribe right now, but I always work for the tribe. Like I said, we're a nonprofit here on a reservation, and everything we do is we try to better our people and better our community here on the reservation. um, so it's that, just constantly always trying to do everything with nothing, and it's always it seems to be it can be like a fight. Everything's a fight. So not between each other necessarily, but just with the uh the outer world and the dominant society sometimes. So I think get to know your local tribes that are around, see what they're doing, see what they're involved in, be a part of them, go visit them. I'm sure you could volunteer and help out. There's so much work to do that I don't think that a tribe would say no. We don't want you. We don't want you here. I think they would be very open to taking any volunteers they possibly could. So I think that's a really good reason. And I would also think to be a good ally, is not only recognizing, the tribe's involvement and what they've been doing, but also, to be involved in your local voting, in your state voting and federal voting. We got to pay attention to who we're putting in the office. And one thing I've learned in the work that I've been doing, um, lobbying on the county level, lobbying on the state level and the federal level, I learned like two things for sure. One is common sense isn't so common. The second thing I've learned is that you're never going to change somebody's mind who's being paid not to. And that's really it. When you think about it, that the way that our American government and operates is through the filter of looking at money, and how much can I get for this, or how much is this worth. And money is the filter that they use to justify everything. And I don't think that our people ever had a consideration like that. We don't view things um, through money. We don't view things of their value, monetary value. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. Again, I appreciate the time here, to be able to talk a little bit. I'm sure there's some questions and things, um, but thank you for allowing me to speak.
Guy, thank you very much. We do have questions. One of them is, you do a lot of work with youth, Menominee youth. And, I think one of the questions that we all sort of feel and face on a regular basis is, how do we just get people to care? I mean, as you say, we're all facing all sorts of things coming at us all the time. Caring about the environment is one, but obviously people are distracted by many things in this world. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're trying to imbue that care and compassion with the Menominee youth? Because I know you do quite a bit of work with them.
Yeah, I would say, I don't have any secret sauce, or I don't have a formula that's going to work for everybody. Sometimes it's always different what will get people motivated. One of the projects, and I don't even know if that's what I would call it, but one of the things that we're planning on doing with our young people here on the reservation is we wanted to. Well, I heard a quote one time. It said, "If you want somebody to build a boat, don't assign tasks and don't have them go get lumber and don't have them do a bunch of things, but make them yearn for the ocean." And we kind of took that sort of in a way that we wanted to make these things that our tribes are fighting for, especially environmental things like bears ears and many. There's so many, you could probably go on and on about some of the major areas here in our beautiful Turtle Island that our tribes are fighting for. But we wanted to go to some of those places, Chaco Canyon. We wanted to go to Bears Ears. We wanted to go by the Missouri River too, and meet with the tribes that are really leading those fights. And we wanted to have our young people be introduced to the connection that those people have to the land and to that sacred area. We were hoping we could perform ceremony there. We were hoping that we can really connect with the land, and we wanted to do this in a couple. I don't know. We've settled, I think, on 4 or 5 places around Turtle Island that we wanted to take our young people to, and really we wanted to camp out there for like a weekend and just be off the grid and connect with the land and really just be in tune with it. And then we wanted to bring them home here, and we wanted to meet with our local tribes here in Wisconsin, or the state that they call Wisconsin. We wanted to go up to Madeline Island and meet with our Anishinaabe brothers and sisters and sit with them and talk about that beautiful journey that they took to come here and all the things that they see there. And we wanted to go down to southern Wisconsin and talk with our Ho-Chunk relatives about some of the areas there. And, of course, we wanted to take them to the Menominee River and retell that story of calling a story sometimes, is something I don't like to do because it makes it seem like it's in a fairy tale or something. But this is oral history that's been passed on from generation to generation, and take great care in passing these things down. So anyway, we wanted to go to that spot and retell that and let those guys realize that these things we're talking about and these things that we're protecting aren't just something you read in the news or read in an article, but they're real. And there's real people that have been in relationship with those places for thousands and thousands of years. And we wanted to really have them hopefully fall in love, with the earth. And one of the things too, we wanted them to come back here and look at this constitutional amendment that we have drafted. And if there's things, let's edit it. If there's things that come to you, there's things that these young people feel that's not there, we'll put there and those kind of things. And then hopefully we can put some events on here in our community, let our community know exactly how our journey was and what we did, and talk about the rights of nature with them. So that's kind of the idea right now.
Guy, thank you very much. It's really important work. I just thought it would be interesting just to briefly, before we get to questions, just the Menominee tribe resolution on the rights of the Menominee River. It begins just where you ended, which is, it says that the Menominee people are indigenous to what is now known as the state of Wisconsin. Our place of origin was at the mouth of the Menominee River, where the 5 clans of the Menominee were created. So it's a very powerful statement, and we have it available if folks want to read it in total. But thank you for sharing that with us. Thomas, do you want to put forward some questions?
Yeah, so we had a couple questions coming in, and just to remind folks, either put up your hand or type them into the chat box if you want us to ask them. We've had a couple come in. First one for Frank. We had someone that wanted some more information about the off-reservation tribal court. So exactly what that means, and in addition to the better protection of trespassers or people being charged with trespass, what else could that off-reservation tribal court be used for? And I guess the third part is it natural for tribes to have that kind of jurisdiction, or is this a brand new thing?
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to go a little bit backwards on those questions there. I think for most tribes, it's natural to have that kind of jurisdiction, especially on reservation. Off reservation is another matter. And so not all tribes' treaties and history shows that they have off reservation treaty rights. But for the Chippewa in particular, we have 44 treaties with the United States. And the treaties for us go from Michigan and even further east. I mean, depending on how far back you want to go, 1795 or something like that, you can go right back to, Lake Michigan and things like that, but all the way over into the Dakotas. And technically the Chippewa are all the way over into Montana. And so our right to hunt, fish, and gather is throughout that territory. That's the way our initial treaties were. And our 1855 Treaty Authority has used the model from the 1854 Treaty Authority. 1854 is the ceded territory by the Chippewa here in Minnesota that's adjacent to our territory. It was 3 months before our treaty was conducted, that the 54 was conducted in Washington. The unfortunate part for us is we're not the drafters of treaties. What happens is, oh, we're still there. Sorry, I had a call. So what happens is the 1837 Treaty Chippewa says that we retain the rights to hunt, fish, and gather wild rice. You get to the 1854 treaty and it says we retain the rights to hunt, fish, and gather. You get to the 55, it doesn't say anything, but it doesn't relinquish the rights to hunt, fish, and gather. But that's been turned around against us here in Minnesota and off reservation in particular. So by creating the 1855 Treaty Authority, that was based on our conservation code. The conservation code for the 1854 Treaty Authority, which is part of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe that we're all members, that applies to the Bois Forte and to the Grand Portage bands. Used to include Fond du Lac, but Fond du Lac got out of that agreement. But the reason we use that particular code is because the words hunt, fish, and gather appear in the 54, the state has an agreement with those bands to not exercise their off-reservation commercial harvesting rights in exchange for compensation. And so we are using the same code in hopes that the state will look at that code as being acceptable because they're paying other Chippewa in Minnesota to live by it. And we're hoping that having the off-reservation tribal court will show that we're also exercising jurisdiction to protect our tribal members who may be engaged in various natural resource gathering or protection activities, but don't have a way to use those laws in state court to protect themselves. And so the off-reservation tribal court, right now, we're going to be looking at conservation type issues. The first ones that I have right now that the state is still trying to control is with regard to people who harvest wild rice. And the state said, well, you can only go out between 9 and 3. And for us, we go out whatever day from dawn to dusk, whenever you got time. And so our 1855 Treaty Authority resolution said from dawn to dusk, but the state would like to think that they're still in charge of us and when we should be harvesting and things like that. And so it becomes important to not just have laws, but to enforce those laws and to protect yourself and your tribal members. And that's all part of sovereignty, and that's all part of the road. When I listen to Guy and even Mari talk about some of the history of the Menominee, I mean, it was the first tribe to be terminated of its recognition back in, I think, 1953. And that's how Public Law 280 came along. And we're subject to that. So we're still dealing with, termination era laws that are still lingering and trying to keep us from defending our rights or exercising our rights. And so it's one more mechanism, the rights of nature, off-reservation tribal court. Other tribes do it. Great Lakes Fish and Wildlife, Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. They regulate rights for members of that organization that are probably a half dozen Chippewa bands across Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So it's not uncommon. It's just that we're doing it now for the first time, and we're going to use it in a way that I think protects people who are trying to protect our waters and our resources.
Great, thanks, Frank. A couple other questions. I think we have time for two more. The first one is for Guy. Question was about the biggest challenges that you face in terms of raising the concept of putting into law legally enforceable rights of nature. Was it the conception part where you're trying to convince other people that this is a good idea? Is it the drafting part? Is it the actual making it stick part about people not being able to figure out what litigation might look like? What were some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is trying to put it into legal language. I'm no lawyer. I'm just a common man, and I don't have that in my brain. Sometimes when I'm in a room with like a bunch of lawyers, my eyes start to go backwards and they flip around and things. They just speak in a different language. But I think it's because this movement, there is no case law really in America. None of these things have been put to the test in some areas, and it's relatively new. It's the translating the ideas, the codes, the policies, and things that we already have in place here on the reservation, into actual legal teeth. So that for me has been probably the hardest part, as to how to think like a lawyer, or to have to rely on lawyers that do that on a daily basis and understand that language, because it really is its own language, and trying to mend those two, or to weave them together. Like I said, I think the easiest, just we've been doing this forever, and we just never really called it that. And sometimes the challenging part can be just getting people to recognize, that it's not just another regulation, or it's just not just another rule you're going to have to follow, but it's more about a changing a worldview, and changing the way in which we see things. It's getting people to understand that, we're no longer going to look at the land as property rights, or as something that we hold dominion over, and that it can exist and should exist and have rights of itself, and it should be able to. If a corporation can be a person, so can our natural world.
Great, thanks, Guy. Last question for Frank, which is the same question: the biggest challenges that you've run into at White Earth in terms of moving this the rights of Menominee forward.
Well, I think in many ways it's like what Guy was talking about. People are uncertain. It's new. It's not proven in a sense, but they like the idea, and they like to think that there's an opportunity to make a difference with a different path. And so whenever you start talking about a different path and a different legal mechanism that isn't, like Guy's talking about, I mean, there just isn't case law on it. You're trying to convince people that you can do something with it, even though you haven't yet. And, that's part of the dilemma. But I think in part also, when the 1855 Treaty Authority adopted the rights of Menominee first, by whatever amount of time it was, it did make the tribal government at White Earth think, well, geez, these are our people out here and they're taking action off reservation. We should be, doing the same thing on reservation. We need to be working together. And I think in that respect, sometimes seeing someone else taking steps brings the extra confidence for you to take steps as well. There was some conversation we had here as a group a while back about how do we get more tribes or more groups to participate when they're not able to see what the positive effects are from the work that we're doing. And so sometimes you have to have a little conflict, you have to have a little friction, and maybe some legal action for people to see what is right and what will work. And, part of this also is trying to figure out how to protect more than just tribal members, because in reality, as I work with the other water protectors who aren't tribal members, they just simply look at clean water as a civil right. And that's really the simplest way to be looking at all of this. So if clean water is a civil right and you have civil rights, can you criminalize the right, to clean water? Can you make it so you're not allowed to have clean water? Is that a criminal law that you can actually enforce? Or is that an unjust law? Is it unjust taking? And, I think in part that's what Guy's talking about, what people do and don't law, how you can make it work, when you can make it work. And we haven't had that conflict yet, but I'm preparing for that conflict in about 2 or 3 different ways. And I think that conflict is probably going to be essential to give some other lessons about how to go forward. But I feel good about working with the rights of Menominee and the rights of nature. And I think it's what's going to make the difference ultimately.
Thank you so much, Frank. Everyone, please join me in thanking both Frank Bibeau and Guy Reiter. We are just so grateful for the work you're doing and for sharing it with us.